Bullies trip him. They didn't know. He's a JIU-JITSU champion just holding back. Marcus Rivera stood barely 5'6" and weighed maybe 130 pounds. At 17, he looked more like a freshman with his quiet demeanor and tendency to keep his head down in the hallways of Westfield High School. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partially obscuring brown eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Most students didn't even know his name, despite him having transferred there 3 months ago. What they didn't know was that Marcus had spent 8 years training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under his father, a former UFC fighter. What they couldn't see beneath his oversized hoodies was a body carved from years of grappling and submission training. What they couldn't understand was that Marcus chose silence not from weakness, but from control. Just get through the day, Marcus told himself every morning as he walked through the glass doors of Westfield High. The school housed nearly 2,000 students, most of whom had known each other since elementary school. Being the new kid already made him an outsider, but being quiet and small made him something else, a target. The first person to notice Marcus was unfortunately Kyle Brennan, a 6'2" linebacker who ruled the junior class through intimidation. Kyle had thick blonde hair, broad shoulders, and the cocky smile that came from never facing consequences. His two companions were Jake Morrison, a stocky wrestler with dead eyes, and Tommy Chen, a tall basketball player who followed Kyle's lead. Started small, a shoulder check in the hallway. "Watch where you're going, freshman." A snicker when Marcus walked by their table, whispered comments about his size, his silence, his apparent weakness. Marcus absorbed it all without reaction, his face a mask of indifference that only frustrated Kyle more. "What's wrong with this kid?" Kyle muttered to Jake after Marcus failed to respond to being called Mouse Boy for the 3rd time. "It's like he's not even human." If only you knew, Marcus thought. His father had taught him that the strongest fighters chose their battles wisely. "A true warrior doesn't fight to prove himself," his father always said. "He fights only when fighting is the only option left." So Marcus endured. He endured having his backpack knocked off his shoulder in crowded hallways. He endured finding his locker decorated with sticky notes calling him a freak. He endured Kyle's group blocking his path to the library, forcing him to take the long way around. The incidents escalated. In the cafeteria, Jake would accidentally bump into him, causing him to spill food. In gym class, Tommy would throw basketballs too hard at his head. Kyle orchestrated it all with calculated cruelty. "He doesn't even fight back," Kyle complained to his girlfriend Sarah during lunch. "What kind of guy just takes it?" Sarah frowned. "Maybe you should just leave him alone, Kyle. He's not bothering anyone." Kyle's eyes flashed. "That's the problem. He acts like he's above it all, like he's better than us. Someone needs to teach him where he stands." Marcus heard this from 2 tables away, his enhanced hearing picking up every word. He felt his jaw clench, then forced himself to relax. "Control," he reminded himself. "Always control." But control became harder as weeks passed. The bullying moved beyond school when Kyle's group started following him home, shouting insults from car windows. They created fake social media accounts to post embarrassing memes. They spread rumors that he was mute, on medication, that his family was involved in drugs. The teachers seemed oblivious or unwilling to intervene. Mrs. Patterson would look away when Kyle made comments during class. Coach Williams never noticed. When Jake flicked pencils at Marcus's head, even Principal Hayes would simply nod and keep walking. They're all part of the same system, Marcus realized. Kyle's father donates money. Kyle's going to get a scholarship. I'm just some transfer student. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late October. Marcus was walking to chemistry class when he saw Kyle's group positioned near the stairwell. Kyle leaned against the wall with his trademark smirk, while Jake and Tommy flanked the hallway. Marcus considered turning around, but he was late for class. "Just walk past them," he told himself. As Marcus approached, Kyle stepped into his path. "Hey there, Mouse Boy," Kyle said loudly. "How's your day going?" Marcus kept his eyes forward and tried to step around him, but Jake blocked his path. "Kyle asked you a question, freak," Jake growled. "I'm fine," Marcus said quietly. "Excuse me." Kyle's grin widened. "Oh, he can talk. Guys, the mouse can actually talk." Several students stopped to watch, forming a circle. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, his breathing becoming controlled, a warning sign from the mat. "What's the matter, Rivera?" Tommy chimed in. "Cat got your tongue?" Marcus tried to step around them, but Kyle moved directly in front. "I don't think we're done talking yet," Kyle said menacingly. "You've been ignoring us for weeks." "I just want to get to class," Marcus replied steadily. Kyle pretended to consider this. "Class, huh? Well, Maybe you should have thought about that before being such a stuck-up little weirdo. What happened? Next occurred in slow motion. Kyle nodded to Jake, who was positioned behind Marcus. Jake's foot shot out in a perfectly timed leg sweep, catching Marcus's ankle as he stepped forward. Marcus felt himself falling, his books scattering as he tumbled toward the concrete stairs. His jiu-jitsu training kicked in automatically. His body twisted midair, hands shooting out to break his fall, core engaging to protect his spine. He hit the ground hard but controlled, rolling to absorb impact. Around him, students burst into laughter. Kyle's voice rose above the rest. "Oops, guess the mouse isn't very coordinated." Marcus lay surrounded by scattered belongings and mocking laughter. His chemistry notebook was crumpled and dirty. His textbook lay with its spine bent unnaturally. But what hurt most wasn't the physical impact. It was seeing Sarah cover her, mouth in shock at the laughter, not the cruelty. It was students pulling out phones to record his humiliation. It was realizing that to them he wasn't human, he was entertainment. Something snapped. Marcus rose with fluid grace that caught students off guard. His movements were suddenly different, more purposeful, controlled. He dusted off his jeans, deliberately, then began collecting his belongings. "That was pretty clumsy, mouse boy," Kyle continued, performing for his audience. "Maybe you should watch where you're—" Marcus straightened and looked directly at Kyle for the first time in 3 months. What Kyle saw in those brown eyes made him step backward involuntarily. "My name," Marcus said in a voice that carried clearly, "is Marcus Rivera." The laughter died instantly. Something in his tone, his posture, made everyone pay attention. Kyle recovered quickly, face flushing with embarrassment. "I don't care what your name is, freak. You're still a—" "Tomorrow," Marcus interrupted, voice calm but carrying an edge. "After school, the empty parking lot behind the gym." Kyle blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What? You want to finish this?" Marcus asked, shouldering his backpack with movements that seemed somehow dangerous. "Then let's finish it, just you and me." Jake laughed nervously. Is the little mouse trying to sound tough? Marcus's gaze shifted to Jake, and the wrestler felt an unexpected chill. "If you want to make it 2-on-1, that's your choice, but know that I won't hold back anymore." The word "anymore" hung in the air like a threat, implying unsuspected capabilities. Kyle's face was red, trapped by his reputation and the crowd looking at him expectantly. "You're crazy if you think I'm wasting time fighting some scrawny transfer student. Then stop bothering me," Marcus said simply. "Your choice." He turned and walked away, leaving Kyle standing with his mouth open and his friends looking uncertain. Word spread through Westfield like wildfire. The quiet new kid had challenged Kyle Brennan. By day's end, everyone was talking about it. Some students were excited to see Kyle tested. Others were planning to record the inevitable beatdown. Marcus spent that evening at his family's home gym, a converted garage with mats, a heavy bag, and training equipment. His father, Roberto Rivera, watched from the doorway as Marcus worked, through his usual routine. "Something happened today," Roberto observed. Marcus paused in his stretching. "I challenged someone to a fight." Roberto nodded slowly. "And why?" "Because ignoring them wasn't working anymore," Marcus replied. "They tripped me in front of half the school today." Everyone laughed. "And tomorrow, you're going to hurt this boy?" Marcus considered the question. "I'm going to defend myself. What happens to him depends on how far he wants to take it." Roberto smiled slightly. "Your control has always been your greatest strength, Mijo. But remember, once you show them what you can do, there's no going back." "Good," Marcus said, surprising himself with the vehemence. "I'm tired of being invisible." The next day, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Students who'd never spoken to Marcus were asking questions. Was he really going to fight Kyle? Did he know Kyle was on the wrestling team? Had he ever fought before? Marcus answered none of them, maintaining his quiet demeanor. But something was different now. Something that made students step aside when he walked the hallways. He moved with the same controlled grace, but now it seemed less like timidity and more like coiled potential. Kyle struggled with the situation. He couldn't back down without losing face, but something about Marcus's demeanor had unsettled him. He found himself studying the smaller boy during shared classes, looking for signs of hidden strength. "He's probably never been in a real fight," Jake assured him during lunch. "You're going to destroy him." "I know that," Kyle snapped, but his voice lacked usual confidence. The final bell rang at 3:15, and by 3:30, nearly 50 students had gathered in the empty parking lot behind the gymnasium. The space was hidden from main buildings by trees, making it perfect for unofficial conflicts. Marcus arrived exactly on time, still wearing jeans and hoodie, still looking like the same quiet kid who'd absorbed abuse for months. He walked to the center and waited, hands at his sides, breathing steady and controlled. Kyle showed up 5 minutes later with Jake and Tommy flanking him like bodyguards. He'd changed into athletic shorts and tank top, clearly expecting physical confrontation. The size difference was immediately apparent. Kyle had at least 6 inches and 40 pounds on Marcus. "Last chance to apologize, freak," Kyle called out as he approached. "Say you're sorry for wasting everyone's time, and maybe I'll go easy on you." Marcus looked around at the crowd, many with phones ready to record. He thought about months of harassment, humiliation, the way they'd all stood by and watched. Then he looked back at Kyle. "No," he said simply. Kyle's face darkened. "Fine, have it your way." He rushed forward with straightforward aggression that had intimidated smaller kids for years. His plan was simple: grab Marcus, throw him down, let size advantage do the rest. Marcus saw him coming with clarity from hundreds of hours of sparring. As Kyle reached for him, Marcus stepped slightly aside and dropped his center of gravity. Kyle's momentum carried him forward into empty air, and Marcus's hand shot out to grab Kyle's wrist. What happened next was poetry in motion, executed with precision of years of training. Marcus pulled on Kyle's wrist, while simultaneously stepping behind him and sweeping his leg. Kyle's feet went out from under him, and he found himself airborne before crashing hard onto asphalt. The impact drove air from his lungs and sent shock through his back. The crowd gasped collectively. Kyle had gone from attacking to flat on his back in less than 2 seconds. "What the hell?" Kyle wheezed, struggling to breathe. Marcus stood, over him perfectly balanced, not even breathing hard. "Get up." Kyle scrambled to his feet, face red with embarrassment and growing anger. "You got lucky, you little—" He swung a wild haymaker at Marcus's head, putting all his strength behind it. Marcus ducked under the punch smoothly, stepped inside Kyle's guard, and wrapped his arms around Kyle's waist. Before the bigger boy, who could react, Marcus had lifted him off his feet and driven him back down with a perfectly executed double-leg takedown. This time, Marcus followed Kyle to the ground. The watching students saw Kyle disappear under Marcus's compact frame, and suddenly they were witnessing something none had expected. This wasn't a bigger kid beating up a smaller one. This was a technical dismantling of everything Kyle thought he knew about fighting. Marcus secured side control, his weight distributed perfectly across Kyle's torso, making it impossible for the larger boy to bridge or roll. Kyle tried to push him off, but Marcus moved with his efforts, flowing from position to position like water. "Let me up," Kyle grunted, voice tight with panic, as he realized he couldn't move. "Are you going to leave me alone?" Marcus asked calmly, maintaining perfect control. "Screw you!" Marcus transitioned smoothly to mount, settling his weight across Kyle's hips. The bigger boy bucked and thrashed, but Marcus rode out every movement with ease. Jake, watching his friend get dominated, decided to intervene. "Get off him!" he shouted, rushing toward the fight. Marcus saw him coming in his peripheral vision. Without releasing Kyle, he shifted weight and caught Jake's ankle as the wrestler tried to kick him. A simple twist and pull sent Jake crashing to the ground beside them, where Marcus immediately trapped him in a triangle choke using his legs while maintaining control of Kyle with his arms. Now both bullies were trapped, Jake's air supply being cut off while Kyle remained pinned and helpless. "Holy crap," someone whispered. "He's controlling both of them." Tommy took a step forward but stopped when Marcus's cold gaze fixed on him. Something in those eyes promised there was room for one more if Tommy wanted to test his luck. Tommy wisely stayed where he was. Jake was beginning to turn red from the choke, hands clawing desperately at Marcus's legs. Marcus held the submission for a few more seconds, long enough to make his point, then released it. Jake rolled away, gasping and coughing. Kyle had stopped struggling and was staring up at Marcus with shock and growing fear. "How are you doing this?" he whispered. 8 years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Marcus replied conversationally. "My father is Roberto Rivera. Maybe you've heard of him. He fought in the UFC for 6 years before retiring." Several students pulled out phones to Google the name. Within seconds, someone called out, "Holy crap, his dad's the Snake Rivera. He submitted 3 guys in the first round during his title run." The revelation rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Marcus wasn't just some quiet transfer student. He was the son of a professional fighter, trained from childhood in one of the most effective martial arts ever developed. Kyle's face had gone pale beneath Marcus's weight. I didn't know of—" "Course you didn't," Marcus said, voice still calm but carrying years of suppressed frustration. "You never bothered to know anything about me. You just saw someone quiet and small and decided I'd make a good target." He leaned closer, voice dropping so only Kyle could hear. But here's what you're going to learn today. Being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and being small doesn't mean being helpless. Marcus stood up smoothly, releasing Kyle entirely. The bigger boy scrambled backward on his hands and knees, putting distance between himself and this person who had just completely upended his understanding of the world. "This is over," Marcus announced to the crowd. "Anyone who has a problem with me can discuss it face to face like a human being. Anyone who thinks they can bully me or anyone else at this school." He looked directly at Jake, who was still coughing and holding his throat. "Well, you've seen what happens." He picked up his backpack and started walking toward the school building, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. "Wait!" Kyle called out, his voice cracking. Marcus turned back, one eyebrow raised. Kyle struggled to his feet, clothes dirty and dignity in shambles. Around him, students were still recording, still taking pictures, still Googling his father's fighting career. By tomorrow, everyone at Westfield High would know exactly what had happened. Kyle started, then stopped. He looked around at the crowd, at his friends avoiding his gaze, at the girl he'd been trying to impress who was looking at him with something that might have been pity. "I'm sorry," he said finally, words coming out in a rush. "For everything. The tripping, the names, all of it. I was just—" Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You were just being a bully," he said simply. "But you can choose to be something else." He turned and walked away, leaving Kyle standing in the parking lot, surrounded by the scattered pieces of his former reputation. The changes at Westfield High were immediate and dramatic. By the next morning, video clips of the fight had spread throughout the school's social media. Students who had never given Marcus a second glance were now approaching him with respect, curiosity, and requests for self-defense advice. Kyle found himself in the unfamiliar position of being the one people whispered about. The story had grown in the telling. Some versions had Marcus submitting all 3 bullies simultaneously. Others claimed he'd learned his skills from Navy SEALs. But the most significant change was in Kyle himself. The humiliation of being dominated in front of half the school had shattered something in his worldview. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy. 3 days after the fight, Kyle found Marcus eating lunch alone in the library. "Can I sit?" Kyle asked quietly. Marcus looked up from his chemistry textbook and gestured to the empty chair. Kyle sat down heavily, his usual swagger completely absent. "I wanted to thank you," he said after a moment. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For not hurting me worse than you did? For not humiliating me more than you had to?" Kyle's voice was subdued. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing to be something else." "And?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "I talked to my girlfriend about what I did to you, about what I've been doing to kids like you for years. She told me she'd been embarrassed to be with me for months." Marcus waited, saying nothing. "I also talked to my dad," Kyle continued. "Told him what happened, what I'd been doing. He was—" Kyle's voice cracked slightly. "He was ashamed of me. Said he didn't raise me to be a coward who picks on people smaller than me." "Your father's right," Marcus said simply. "I know." Kyle looked directly at Marcus. "I want to do better. I want to be better. I just don't know how." Marcus considered this. "Start by apologizing to everyone you've hurt, not just me, all of them. Then spend time thinking about why you felt the need to hurt people in the first place." Kyle nodded slowly. "And if some of them don't want to forgive me, then you live with that," Marcus replied. "That's part of being accountable for your choices." Over the following weeks, Westfield High settled into a new equilibrium. Kyle kept his word, seeking out students he'd tormented and offering sincere apologies. Some accepted them, others didn't. He joined the school's peer mediation program and started volunteering at a local youth center. Jake and Tommy gave Marcus a wide berth, but stopped their harassment of other students entirely. Word had spread that Marcus's father occasionally visited the school, and the sight of the snake Rivera walking through hallways served as a powerful deterrent. Marcus found that his life at Westfield had changed completely. Students who had once looked through him now nodded respectfully when he passed. Teachers who had ignored the bullying now made efforts to include him in discussions. He even received an invitation to join the wrestling team, though he politely declined. "Why don't you want to compete?" Coach Williams asked. Marcus thought about it. "Because I didn't learn to fight to win tournaments," he said finally. "I learned to protect myself and others. There's a difference." The coach nodded, seeming to understand something important in that distinction. On a Friday afternoon in late November, Marcus was walking to his car when he saw a familiar scene playing out near the school's front entrance. A group of sophomore football players had cornered a thin freshman, shoving him back and forth while laughing at his attempts to retrieve scattered homework. Marcus paused, watching. The freshman looked terrified, but was trying to stand up for himself, much as Marcus had for months before reaching his breaking point. Not anymore, Marcus thought. He walked over with the same controlled confidence he'd discovered weeks earlier. "Is there a problem here?" he asked calmly. The sophomores turned to look at him, expressions shifting from amusement to uncertainty as they recognized him. Everyone at Westfield knew Marcus Rivera now. "No problem," the apparent leader said quickly. "We were just messing around." "Masamati, it doesn't look like he's having fun," Marcus observed, nodding toward the freshman still gathering papers. The sophomore looked between Marcus and his friends, calculating odds he didn't like. Whatever. This is boring anyway. They walked, away without another word, leaving Marcus and the freshman alone. Marcus knelt down and helped gather the scattered homework, handing papers to the younger boy with a slight smile. "You okay?" The freshman nodded gratefully. "Thanks, I'm David, by the way." "Marcus and David, if they bother you again, come find me." David's eyes widened slightly. "Really? Really? Nobody should have to deal with that alone." As Marcus walked to his car, he reflected on how much had changed since that day in October when Kyle's group had tripped him near the stairwell. He'd discovered that strength wasn't just about knowing how to fight, it was about choosing when to fight, and more importantly, choosing what to fight for. He'd also learned that sometimes the only way to stop being a victim was to refuse to be one regardless of consequences. The skills his father had taught him were just tools. What mattered was having the courage to use them when necessary. Most importantly, he'd realized that true strength meant protecting others, not just himself. The quiet kid who had once absorbed abuse in silence had become someone others could count on for protection and justice. As he drove home, Marcus smiled slightly, thinking about his father's reaction when he told him about the confrontation with the sophomores. Roberto would be proud, not just of his son's fighting skills, but of his judgment in using them. A true warrior doesn't fight to prove himself, Marcus remembered. He fights only when fighting is the only option left. Today, fighting had been the only option left for David, and Marcus had been there to provide it. The transformation was complete. The mouse had become the lion, but more importantly, the victim had become the protector. And at Westfield High, that made all